Let's be honest, you are getting ripped off every single time you put a tomato in your cart at the grocery store. I walked into my local supermarket yesterday and saw organic, vine-ripened tomatoes selling for $4.99 a pound, and I almost laughed out loud because I know exactly what that tomato tastes like. It tastes like wet cardboard and expensive disappointment. It was picked green 2 weeks ago in a different time zone, gassed with ethylene to turn it red, and shipped 3,000 miles just to sit on your counter and rot from the inside out. Stop doing this to yourself. If you have a backyard, even just a standard quarter-acre suburban lot with a strip of grass, you are sitting on a production facility that can completely replace the grocery store produce aisle from July until October. I'm going to show you exactly how to grow 300 pounds of tomatoes this summer using what I call the 20-plant protocol. This isn't some theoretical gardening fluff or a hobby vlog. This is a hard numbers production system designed for the average American family of four who wants to stop bleeding money on inferior food and start building real food security. Now, I need you to understand that I didn't start here. 7 years ago, when I first tried to beat the grocery store, I planted 3 random tomato plants in a shady corner of my yard, watered them whenever I remembered, and ended up with exactly 5 edible tomatoes and a massive infestation of hornworms. I calculated it later and realized I spent about $50 on soil and cages to get $2 worth of fruit. It was embarrassing, and my spouse definitely made fun of me. But I'm an obsessive note-taker, and I treat my homestead like a business. I spent the last 5 seasons refining a system that is predictable, scalable, and frankly, pretty hard to mess up if you just follow the math. Last year, my 20 plants averaged 15 pounds of fruit per plant. That is 300 pounds of food. If you bought that same quality of organic heirloom tomatoes at the farmer's market at $4 a pound, that is $1,200 of tax-free value I pulled out of 2 raised beds. This isn't magic. It's biology and management. I'm going to walk you through every single step, from the specific varieties that offer the highest caloric return to the exact fertilizer blend that prevents blossom end rot, so you can fire your grocery store this summer. Now, I know what you're thinking because I thought the exact same thing 7 years ago. 20 plants sounds like an absolute nightmare to manage. You're imagining a jungle that takes over your life. But here's the secret that nobody tells you. 20 plants is actually the magic number for a family of 4 if you want to completely exit the grocery store system for tomato products. If you plant 4 or 5 tomatoes, like most beginners do, you will have enough for salads in August, but you won't have enough to preserve for the winter. The math is simple but brutal. On average, a well-maintained, indeterminate tomato plant in a decent climate will yield about 15 pounds of fruit over the season. So, 20 plants times 15 pounds gives us that 300-pound target. That isn't just 300 pounds of fresh eating. That is your pasta sauce, your salsa, your pizza sauce, and your chili base for the entire year. However, do not go out and buy 20 random plants from the hardware store because that is the fastest way to fail. You need a strategic roster, just like a sports team. We are going to break this down into a specific ratio. 12 paste tomatoes, 6 slicers, and 2 cherry tomatoes. This is the ratio I've tested for 3 years, and it works perfectly because it balances fresh eating with serious food preservation. Your 12 paste tomatoes are the workhorses of this operation, and for this, I only grow San Marzanos. Do not waste your time with generic Romas. They lack flavor and are prone to disease. San Marzanos are fleshy. They have very few seeds, and they have low water content, which means when you boil them down for sauce, you aren't simmering them for 12 hours just to evaporate water. These 12 plants are going to give you about 180 pounds of fruit, strictly for canning and freezing. Next, you have your 6 slicers. These are the glory tomatoes, the ones you slice thick for a BLT that changes your life, or a caprese salad that costs $20 at a restaurant. For these, I highly recommend growing heirlooms like Cherokee Purple or a Brandywine. Yes, they are a little uglier and lower yielding than a hybrid commercial variety, but the flavor profile is complex, smoky, and sweet. It's something you literally cannot buy. If you grow 6 of these, you'll have enough to eat fresh every single day and give some away to neighbors to buy their silence when your rooster crows at dawn. Finally, you only need 2 cherry tomato plants, and I mean strictly 2. I plant Sun Golds, which are these bright orange, candy-sweet nuggets that ripen early. The mistake everyone makes is planting 6 cherry tomato plants, and by August, you are drowning in thousands of tiny tomatoes that rot before you can pick them. 2 plants will give you a bowl of snacks on the counter every single day from July to frost, and that is all you need. The last critical piece of this setup phase is timing, and this is where patience pays off. You have 2 options: start your own seeds or buy starts. If you want these specific varieties I just mentioned, like the true San Marzano Lungo number 2 or the Cherokee Purple, you usually have to start from the seed about 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date. If you are intimidated by seed starting, that is fine, but do not buy your starts from a big box store in April just because they are out on the sidewalk. Those plants are often root-bound and stressed. Find a local nursery that grows their own stock, or wait until the farmer's market opens. We are playing a long game here. A healthy, small plant put in the ground at the right time will lap a stressed, overgrown plant within 3 weeks. You can buy the most expensive, pedigreed seeds in the world, but if you put them in the wrong spot or in dead soil, you are just composting money. The absolute first thing you need to do before you even think about putting a shovel in the ground is to audit your sunlight. Tomatoes are essentially solar panels that convert sunlight into sugar, and if they don't get enough charge, the system fails. You need a minimum of 6 hours of direct, unshaded sunlight every single day, and 8 hours is significantly better. I learned this the hard way 4 years ago when I tried to squeeze a second bed behind my garage that only got 4 hours of morning light. The plants grew 6 feet tall and looked lush, but they produced exactly 0 tomatoes because they never had enough energy to set fruit. Go outside tomorrow at 9 a.m., noon, and 3 p.m. and actually look at where the shadows fall, because guessing is expensive. Once you have your location locked in, we have to talk about soil, and this is where most people cheap out and fail. Do not just dig a hole in your native clay and hope for the best. Tomatoes are heavy feeders that need loose, friable soil to send roots down deep. I build all my beds using a specific thirds recipe that I've tweaked over the years. 1/3 compost for nutrients, 1/3 peat moss or coco coir for water retention, and 1/3 coarse vermiculite or perlite for aeration. This mix ensures that the soil never compacts, which is critical because tomato roots need oxygen just as much as they need water. If you are building a standard 4x8 raised bed, which is 32 square feet, filling it with this mix using bags from a big box store will cost you about $200. However, if you find a local landscape supply yard and buy in bulk, you can fill that same bed for about $85. That is $100 savings just by making one phone call and borrowing a truck. Before you plant a single thing, there is one $15 purchase that will save you an entire season of frustration, and that is a simple soil pH test kit. Tomatoes are incredibly picky about soil chemistry. They need a pH between 6.0 and 6.8 to uptake nutrients efficiently. If your soil is too acidic, say down around 5.5, the plants literally cannot absorb the calcium in the soil even if it's there. and you will end up with blossom and rot later in the season. I skipped this step my second year and watched 20 beautiful plants develop black, rotting bottoms in July because my soil was too acidic and I didn't know it. Spend the $15, do the 5-minute test, and add lime if it's too low or sulfur if it's too high. It is the cheapest insurance policy you can buy for your garden, and it guarantees that when you do add fertilizer later, your plants can actually use it. The biggest mistake people make is looking at the calendar instead of the thermometer, because tomatoes do not care what day it is. They only care about soil temperature. You absolutely cannot put these plants in the ground until the soil temperature is consistently hitting 60 degrees Fahrenheit at 4 inches deep. If you rush this because you see your neighbors planting in early May when the soil is still 50 degrees, your plants will sit there in shock, turn purple from phosphorus lockout, and you will lose 2 weeks of growth while they recover. I learned this the hard way 3 years ago when I got impatient, planted early, and watched my seedlings struggle while the ones I planted 2 weeks later in warmer soil overtook them in 10 days. Buy a $5 soil thermometer, stick it in the ground in the morning, and if it says 60, you have a green light. When you actually plant, you are going to do something that feels completely wrong, which is burying 2/3 of the plant underground. If you have a 12-inch seedling, I want you to strip off the bottom leaves and bury about 8 inches of that stem. If you look closely at a tomato stem, you see those tiny little hairs. Every single one of those has the potential to become a root. By burying the stem deep, you are essentially tripling the size of the root system right out of the gate. And a massive root system is the only way you support 15 pounds of fruit later. I dig a deep hole, and before the plant goes in, I add my specific starter charge directly into the bottom. This isn't a guess, it's a recipe. I drop in exactly 2 tablespoons of bone meal for long-term phosphorus, 1 tablespoon of blood meal for an immediate nitrogen hit, and 2 crushed eggshells for slow-release calcium. Mix that into the bottom soil so the roots don't burn. Place your plant in, fill it back up, and pack it down gently. Do not walk away and grab a beer yet, because you are not done until you mulch. This is the step that 90% of home gardeners skip, and it is the reason their plants die of blight in August. Early blight is a soil-borne fungus, and it gets onto your plants when rain or hose water hits the bare dirt and splashes spores up onto the lower leaves. To stop this, you need a physical barrier. I immediately put down a 3-inch layer of straw. Not hay, because hay has seeds and you'll be weeding all summer. Right up to the base of the stem. You can also use shredded leaves or pine bark, but you need that 3-inch buffer. This $10 bale of straw is the only thing standing between your crop and the fungal death that wipes out entire neighborhoods of gardens every July. If you walk into a garden center and buy those little conical wire cages that cost $5 a piece, you have already decided to fail before summer even starts. Those things are designed for determinate patio tomatoes that grow 2 feet tall, not the indeterminate beasts we are growing that will hit 8 feet by August. I made this mistake my first year, and by July 15th, my plants had crushed the cages flat, fallen into the mud, and the entire crop rotted from lack of airflow. You need structural steel to hold up 300 pounds of fruit. The only system I trust is the cattle panel trellis, which is basically indestructible and will last you 20 years. You go to a farm supply store, not a home improvement store, and buy a 16-foot by 50-inch cattle panel for about $35. While you're there, grab 3 6.5-foot T-posts for roughly $6 each. To set this up, you drive your T-posts into the ground about 18 inches deep, spaced 8 feet apart, lift the cattle panel up so the bottom is a foot off the ground, and zip tie it to the posts. This gives you a rigid 6-foot-high steel grid that can support a hurricane. If you're doing the math, that is about $55 in materials to support roughly 8 to 10 plants depending on your spacing, which breaks down to an infrastructure cost of about $6 per plant over a decade. Compare that to buying a flimsy cage every 2 years that ends up in a landfill. Once your trellis is up, you have to commit to the single-leader pruning method, or suckering, which is the difference between a jungle and a harvest. Indeterminate tomatoes want to become vines with 50 branches, but we are going to force them to be a single stem that climbs straight up that cattle panel. Every week, you will see a little sprout shooting out at a 45-degree angle between the main stem and a sunleaf. That is a sucker. You need to snap that off with your fingers while it is less than 3 inches long. By removing these energy vampires, you force the plant to put 100% of its energy into the main stem and fruit production rather than growing leaves. It feels aggressive to snap off healthy green growth, but if you don't do this every 5 to 7 days, your 20 plants will turn into a tangled mess where disease spreads like wildfire. I aim to keep my plants to 1 main leader, maybe 2 if I have a really vigorous heirloom, and I use jute twine to tie that main stem to the cattle panel every foot of growth. This keeps the fruit off the ground, ensures every leaf gets sunlight, and makes harvesting a 30-second job instead of a treasure hunt. Now we enter the maintenance phase, and this is where I see 90% of gardeners sabotage their own success because they think watering means standing there with a hose for 10 minutes after work. If you are spraying water from overhead and getting the leaves wet, you are inviting early blight to destroy your crop by mid-July. Tomato leaves need to stay bone dry. Only the roots need water. You need to automate this because life happens, and missing 2 days of watering in a heat wave will ruin your fruit set. I strongly recommend buying a simple drip tape irrigation kit online for about $30. It looks like a flat hose with tiny slits every 12 inches, and it connects right to your spigot. You snake this through your bed under the mulch, and when you turn it on, it slowly weeps water directly into the root zone without splashing a single drop of mud onto the leaves. This $30 investment gave me back about 40 hours of my life last summer and kept my foliage green until October. With your drip system installed, you need to follow the deep soak rule. Most people water shallowly every day, which keeps the roots right at the surface, where they dry out fast. You want to force those roots to dig down 2 or 3 feet. To do this, I run my drip tape for about 45 to 60 minutes, but only 2 or 3 times a week, depending on the heat. You want the water to penetrate 6 inches down. Stick your finger in the soil. If it is damp at the second knuckle, do not water. This cycle of deep saturation, followed by a slight drying period, encourages massive root expansion, which is exactly what supports a 15-pound yield per plant. Once your plants hit about 2 feet tall and you see the first yellow flowers appearing, you have to change your fertilizer strategy immediately. Up until now, your plants have been running on that blood meal nitrogen we put in the hole, which is great for green leaves, but if you keep feeding high nitrogen, you will end up with a gorgeous 10-foot-tall green bush with 0 tomatoes. You need to switch to a phosphorus and potassium-heavy mix to support fruit set. I use a granular organic fertilizer with an NPK ratio close to 3:4:6 or 2:5:3. I sprinkle 2 tablespoons of this around the drip line of each plant every 14 days, like clockwork. This signals the plant to stop growing leaves and start pumping sugar into the fruit. This consistent watering and feeding schedule is also your only defense against the single most heartbreaking issue in the garden, which is blossom end rot. You will know you have it when you walk out to pick your first perfect tomato, turn it over, and see a sunken, black, leathery scab on the bottom. It makes you want to cry. This is technically a calcium deficiency, but don't go dumping milk on your soil. The calcium is usually already there. The plant just can't drink it because the soil moisture is inconsistent. Calcium needs water to travel up the stem, so if you let the soil dry out completely and then flood it, the delivery system breaks and the fruit rots from the bottom up. If you stick to the deep soak schedule I just gave you, you will solve 95% of your calcium issues without buying a single bottle of Rot Stop spray. This is the part of the video where I need you to accept that you're not just a gardener. You are a security guard for a biological asset. Nature is brutal, and there are two specific enemies that wake up every morning with the sole purpose of destroying your harvest: early blight and the tomato hornworm. If you wait until you see holes in your leaves or black spots on your stems to react, you have already lost. You cannot cure these problems. You can only prevent them. My defense strategy is not a wait-and-see approach. It is a proactive chemical warfare schedule that starts the week after planting and does not stop until the first frost kills the plants. The first enemy is early blight, which is that fungus we mulched against earlier. Even with mulch, spores travel on the wind. To fight this, you need a bottle of copper fungicide concentrate. It costs about $18 for a pint, and that single bottle will last you 3 seasons. Every 10 days, or immediately after a heavy rain, I mix up a pump sprayer, 2 tablespoons per gallon, and coat the leaves until they drip. This creates a hostile environment on the leaf surface, so when a spore lands, it cannot germinate. 2 years ago, I got lazy in mid-July because my plants looked invincible. I skipped 3 weeks of spraying, and by the first week of August, the bottom half of every San Marzano plant turned yellow and brown. I calculated that mistake cost me about 50 pounds of fruit that never ripened because the plants lost their solar panels. Do not be me. Spray the copper. Your second enemy is the tomato hornworm, a green caterpillar the size of your thumb that can strip an entire branch of leaves in one night. They are almost impossible to see because they are the exact same shade of green as the plant. You will smell them before you see them. They leave behind square black droppings that look like tiny hand grenades. The solution here is biological, not chemical. You need a product called BT, or Bacillus thuringiensis. It is a naturally occurring bacteria that is completely safe for humans, pets, and birds, but it destroys the digestive system of caterpillars. I add a teaspoon of BT concentrate to my copper spray mix every single time. It costs $15 for a bottle, and if a hornworm takes 1 bite of a leaf sprayed with BT, it stops eating immediately and dies within 24 hours. Finally, you need to institute the 5-minute coffee walk. Every single morning, before I check my email or start my car, I walk the rows with my coffee mug. I am not watering, I am scouting. I look for those black droppings on the mulch. I look for the white moth eggs on the undersides of leaves, and I check for the telltale yellowing of lower leaves. If I see a leaf with a yellow spot and a brown bullseye in the center, that is blight. I pinch it off immediately and put it in the trash, never the compost pile. This 5-minute investment is the difference between losing a branch and losing a plant. You are catching problems when they are manageable, usually costing you $0, instead of panic buying cures when the plant is half dead. You have battled the bugs, you have balanced the soil chemistry, and now you are staring at a massive green tomato that is starting to blush pink. The instinct is to leave it on the vine until it is a deep, blood-red trophy, but that is actually a rookie mistake that costs you flavor and yield. I harvest my tomatoes at the breaker stage, which is the exact moment the fruit turns about 30 to 50% colored. If you leave a tomato on the vine until it is fully ripe, you are gambling with nature every single hour. A sudden rainstorm will cause it to swell and crack, or a squirrel will take 1 single bite out of it just to spite you. By picking at the breaker stage, the tomato has already formed the abscission layer on the stem, meaning it has cut itself off from the plant's nutrient supply anyway. It will ripen perfectly on your kitchen counter over the next 3 days with zero loss of flavor and zero risk of rotting in the garden. When you start pulling in these harvests, I want you to actually weigh them. Don't just guess. I keep a cheap digital kitchen scale right by the back door, and every basket gets logged in a simple notebook. This is how I know for a fact that my system yields 300 pounds, and it is the only way you can prove to your skeptical spouse that this obsession is actually profitable. Let's do the real math on that. If you grew 300 pounds of organic heirloom tomatoes, you are looking at a market value of roughly $4 per pound minimum. That is $1,200 of food value sitting on your counter. Now look at your costs. Even if you spent $200 on soil, $55 on trellising, $30 on irrigation, and $50 on fertilizers and seeds, your total input for the first year is under $350. That means you are profiting $850 in your very first season. And remember, the soil and the cattle panels are one-time costs. Next year, your only cost is seeds and a little fertilizer, so your ROI skyrockets. Once you bring that $1,200 bounty inside, do not, under any circumstances, put those tomatoes in the refrigerator. The moment a tomato drops below 55 degrees Fahrenheit, the enzyme that produces flavor compounds is permanently destroyed and the texture turns mealy. You spent 3 months growing a gourmet product. Do not turn it into a grocery store reject in 3 hours. Store them stem side down on a flat surface on your counter, out of direct sunlight. Stem side down keeps air from entering the scar and prevents moisture loss, keeping them firm for up to a week. If you have too many to eat fresh, and you will, you need to process them immediately because a counter full of rotting tomatoes is just composting your hard-earned money. Now here is the beautiful problem you are going to face in late August. You will have 300 pounds of tomatoes and your family will be physically unable to eat another caprese salad. This is where the real wealth is built, because you stop buying jarred pasta sauce for $7 a pop. You can absolutely get into water bath canning, and I have a whole shelf of quart jars to prove it works. But let me give you the cheat code that saves me 40 hours of work every September. You don't have to, can everything immediately. I take my San Marzanos, wash them, core the stems, throw them whole into gallon freezer bags, and toss them into the deep freeze. When I want to make sauce in January, I pull them out and run them under warm water. The skins slip right off in 5 seconds without boiling, and the freezing process breaks down the cell walls so they cook down into sauce in half the time. It is the lazy man's way to preservation, and the flavor is virtually identical. Speaking of saving money, before you pull those frost-killed vines in November, you're going to do one last thing that makes this entire system self-perpetuating. Remember those $6 heirloom seed packets we bought? You never have to buy them again, because we grew open-pollinated varieties like Cherokee Purple and Brandywine. They breed true. Pick your absolute best-looking, healthiest, fully ripe tomato from your best plant, squeeze the seeds and jelly into a solo cup, add a splash of water, and let it sit on top of your fridge for 3 days until it grows a layer of mold. That fermentation kills any seed-borne diseases. Rinse them in a strainer, dry them on a paper plate for a week, and you just harvested $40 worth of seeds for next year. That is compound interest in the garden. I know 20 plants and 300 pounds sounds like a massive undertaking, especially if you are staring at a patch of grass right now. If that number scares you, cut the system in half. Build one 4x8 bed, plant 10 tomatoes, 6 paste, 3 slicers, 1 cherry, and aim for 150 pounds. The math holds up, the techniques are exactly the same, and the flavor will still ruin you for grocery store tomatoes forever. The only way you fail is by not starting, by letting another summer go by paying premium prices for inferior food. This system works. I've killed enough plants to know what doesn't work, and I've refined this protocol so you don't have to make those same expensive mistakes. If you found value in this breakdown, if I saved you from buying a flimsy tomato cage or planting in the shade, do me a favor and hit that like button so this video finds more people who are tired of eating cardboard. And I want to know in the comments below, what is the one tomato variety you have grown that was a total disappointment? Let's warn each other so we don't waste the space. Get your seeds ordered, get that compost delivered, and I will see you in the next one.